Hello and welcome back to the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Robum, joined as always by my co-host, Jacob Hare. And today we are very lucky to be joined by Doc Emrick. Doc, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yes, we've actually sought to do this for some time. I'm glad we're able to do it.
We are too. It's a pleasure to have you on, and we're excited to get to ask you some questions today. So without further ado, let's get it underway. My first question for you is, where did you find your inspiration to become a broadcaster?
By watching hockey for the first time, I think that happens maybe it happened with you guys too. The first time you see a game live, it hooks you. Now, prior to that, at age 9 was the first time I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, but it was always baseball. And then at 14, I saw my first live hockey game in Fort Wayne. And there was something about that action. And I had seen a few games on television. Television of hockey was very limited back at that time. I'd seen a few games on television, but seeing a game live hooked me as a fan. And at the same time, it hooked me wanting to be a broadcaster of it. And that's what started it all. And that was 61 years ago. And then, of course, the real challenge is getting a chance to do it for a living. And it took another 13 years beyond that, because I was only 14 at the time. So I was age 27 when I first got to do it for a living. And that was the start of all the lunacy. So I only wish the same for you guys as you move on, because I'm sure you have aspirations of some kind in sports broadcasting. So I wish you only double the joy that I've had. And if you have that, then you've got a lifetime full of joy.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. And I wanted to follow up about your time at Bowling Green State and ask, how did your time there help shape you into the broadcaster you became?
Well, that gave me the first experience of doing a game to a live audience. I had taught at a small college in Western Pennsylvania called Geneva for 2 years, and was still, as I was doing that, realizing that I might wind up having to be a career college teacher. And there was nothing wrong with that. I enjoyed the students a lot. I was almost the same age as the seniors were. I was only about 2 years older than they were. So I was sort of their contemporary. But I realized that if this hope to be a hockey broadcaster never worked out for me, being a college teacher wasn't going to be that bad. But I realized that I would need to get the advanced degree, the doctoral degree, if that was going to be my lot in life. And my father, who was a high school principal in Indiana, said, if you're going to go for the doctorate, you better do it while you're young and single, because it is a tremendous commitment to spend that much time in advanced study to get that doctorate. So I took him at his word and took the advice of other people too. And while I was still about 25, I applied at a couple of schools that had doctoral programs that also had campus stations that carried the school's hockey teams. Bowling Green and Michigan were those two, and they both offered assistantships. But when I visited Bowling Green, the program director of WBGU, the FM station that carried the game, said, we normally have a student do the second period of the game, and I do the first and third. So if you accept the assistantship, you can do the second period of the game. The only games I'd ever done up until that time were to myself into a tape recorder. So I immediately accepted. And I got to do 18 home periods in 1 year and 18 home periods in another year, plus 2 periods of playoff games. And so I had a lot of experience thanks to Bowling Green. And that tape actually got me my first professional job. So that's what Bowling Green did for me, in addition to the doctorate.
As being a young broadcaster in hockey, it's a very hard sport to call as fans who watch it. So what's one thing that you learned as a young broadcaster about calling hockey that helped you for success later in your career?
I don't think I learned it right away, Jacob. I think it took time, because over 3,700 games in 47 years, I was still learning when I did my last game, the Stanley Cup championship game between Tampa Bay and Dallas. I was still picking up some things, and I was still learning the crazy geometry of it. I think I learned more in the minors faster than I did in the NHL because there were more mistakes made by players and more unpredictability. In the NHL, if a guy's behind his net and he's doing a breakout pass to a winger, usually that pass is going to go where it's intended. But in the minors, chances are he's behind the net. He might get forechecked by two players and cough it up, and then immediately it's in the net. More mistakes mean more unpredictability that you have to read as an announcer and respond to. So I'm not sure that there was any one thing that I learned other than the durability of a long season. When I was at Bowling Green, the season was just a couple of games every weekend. When you're in professional hockey, it's three or four games a week. And a lot of times in the minors, because Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are the times that people can come out to games. Your normal schedule was Wednesday when not many people showed up, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And because of the fatigue of players, that Sunday game was not usually the best game, but it was all box office. It was when people could pay the price of admission and come out. And so you would never play all those games at home. You would be traveling then too. And so you were as tired as the players were, but in a different way. It was more mental fatigue. So I think the grind of a season, even though it was all fun because it was exciting and new to a broadcaster that had just come from Bowling Green, I think that was probably it.
So I want to shift and ask about some specific moments in your career. One of those being the Patrick Kane Stanley Cup winning goal against the Flyers. In an NBC Sports documentary recently. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Magnificent call on that, didn't I? Wow.
Yeah. You mentioned in the documentary, you mentioned that if you could redo one call, you would want to redo that one. And you actually redid the call in the episode. I wanted to ask about what was going through your head when you saw that. And it looked like Kane was really the only one in the entire building that knew that he had just scored the Stanley Cup winning goal.
Yeah, I started to call a score and then I pulled back. And, I remember Al Michaels, when he got his Lifetime Achievement Award at the Emmys one year, said, "This is not Hollywood. We don't get 25 takes. We only get one." And I wish I'd have gotten two. And the documentary gave me a second one. But of course, it means nothing when you blew the first one. Yeah, I got Scott out of my mouth, but then I pulled back because I wasn't sure it was in. And if it's a cup clincher and it's an overtime winner, you better be sure that you've got it right. Well, of course, by trying to be sure that I got it right, I got it wrong. And the interesting thing too, and I don't know if that was cut out of the documentary now, I only saw it once, but the man of all things who was not allowed to be behind the net flipping the light on anymore, but was up in the press box and was down on the goal line, he is not allowed to turn the light on unless the referee points, which never happened on the goal in Philadelphia. But he did see it cross the line and go into the net, but he was handcuffed. He was not allowed to turn the goal light on because the referee had not yet pointed to the net. In an earlier time, we had goal judges behind each net who, when they saw it cross the line, would turn the light on. But times changed, replay came in, and those men were taken away from that location. Had they been there, they would have turned the light on, and I would have confidently yelled score, and this whole thing wouldn't have happened. But it was a terrible job by me, and even though it's a human endeavor calling a game, as Patrick Waugh said once when he gave up 7, we're paid to get those.
Have you ever talked to Patrick Kane about the incident?
Oh, sure. The next fall, October 31st. Of 2010, the Devils were playing in Chicago, and that was the first I'd seen Patrick since that night. And I never talked to him after the game. Of course, there was a celebration going on, and so the crowd parted away from his dressing stall, and I sat next to him because back in that time there was no COVID, and so you could sit next to a player. And I said, "Okay, what did you see?" And he said, I let the shot go from the left circle. And as I got closer to the net to follow up the shot, I realized it was nowhere around. And I looked further and I saw it. I saw it in the back of the net. And I looked at the referee as I'm going behind the net, and he's not doing anything. And I realized my job at that point was to sell it. So I headed to the other end of the ice to our goaltender, and I was selling all the way. And the guys weren't coming off the bench right away because they were worried about getting a penalty. But anyway, it eventually got solved. But of all things, the public address announcer had to announce, as the two referees hastily convened at center ice, the play is under review. Well, the Flyers had skated away, and there was confusion all around it. But that's what happened.
So I wanna move to another call, another Stanley Cup clinching goal that you had the opportunity
Oh,
to call.
good. Well, let's get to that then.
Alec Martinez's game-winning goal against the Rangers in Game 5 of the Stanley Cup. What was it like to get to call that and really express your excitement over the play?
Well, it was, you always want to, as I said, you always wanted to have a cup clincher that was clear. And, you know, I talked to referees a lot too, all the way back into the minors. And they said, whenever there's an overtime penalty or an overtime goal in a playoff series that's going to end it, you want to make sure that the penalty is a good one to call. And you want to make sure that the overtime goal is clearly a legal goal. You want it to be clean. And the same thing is true with calling an overtime winner. And obviously the Kane goal was not clean, but the Martinez one was. Mm-hmm. First of all, the advantage to a play-by-play announcer was it was also from the left side like Kane's was, and it did not disappear from my sight from Lundqvist. It was clear that it had gone past him. And so it was an easy call to make. And, you know, you don't pull for either side. You just pull for a good scoring play. And because it was a home goal, you don't say much after. You just let the crowd go and let the guys down in the truck do what they do really well. And that's grab the pictures that are necessary to convey the shock and the disappointment of the Rangers and the joy and the elation of the Kings and their fans.
Well, I mean, you made so many great calls over the years that we could go on and on for days about them. But I just want to ask, when did you know it was finally time to walk away from broadcasting and move into the next stage of your life?
Oh, I don't know what prompted it. It was between the second and third round of the playoffs in 2020 when they had reconvened and gone into bubbles in Toronto and Edmonton. And I was all along. I had a wonderful ally in our producer, Sam Flood, who was involved in hiring me back during the lockout of 04-05 to do NBC games. And he had called that spring after we had done the last game on March the 10th in Chicago, between Chicago and San Jose. And no, I guess it was in May, because there was uncertainty all along in when we would reconvene or whether we would at all and have a Stanley Cup champion. For sure, NBC would have the coverage of the Stanley Cup final if there was one in 2020. And he said, I'm assuring you of this, whatever happens, you will not be asked to do anything that you're not comfortable with. And with my cancer background, and also with the fact that there's no covering my age, I was in my middle 70s, that the whole notion of getting on airplanes and going to various places, despite the fact that when I got there, there was a bubble and that would reasonably protect me. That whole notion of doing that didn't appeal to me. And so I was allowed to do all 4 rounds from my house, and they did miraculous things like they were doing for other people to enable them to actually, during the initial phase of COVID, to actually call live events from home. So that was a wonderful bonus for me. But it was probably between rounds 2 and 3 that I looked back over my career and decided, you know, this has really been wonderful. My wife has her health. I have mine. It's been now 60 years since I saw my first game, 50 years since I was a freelance unpaid reporter covering the Penguins as while I was still teaching at Geneva, and it's been 40 years of covering the NHL. It's not like those numbers dictated it, but I guess I decided that I'd had a great run, and I was still able to enjoy life and not have to get on planes and stay in hotels and do all of that part of the job that had become tiring during the last couple of years. And so people were very understanding about that, allowed me to finish the playoffs, and then allowed me to announce that fall that I was retiring.
What was it like to call games at home? Because one of the best experiences of being a broadcaster is being in the arena and feeling the energy of the fans, but to be in your home or your basement or wherever you were calling the games and just to be watching them on a TV screen, how did you adapt and change as a broadcaster to that situation?
Well, it didn't, in terms of the sound of the crowd, it didn't make any difference because there was no crowd. There were a couple of adjustments in that the telecast wouldn't enable you to do, but I had help from our truck and also from Eddie Olczyk to adjust. One such adjustment would be when the game was being shown and there were line changes from the bench. Example, when a player was standing behind the net holding the puck for 5 seconds. That was what we saw at home, and that was what I saw as well, because I was getting the game feed, nothing special. And so I knew there were line changes going on, and either Eddie or Brian Boucher could help me with who was coming onto the ice if it was important. For example, if it was a player that had been hurt earlier and was now finally getting a shift, they would jump on and mention that. And that was of help to me because I couldn't see the bench area to tell. I could only see the bench area if the camera was showing. And I think too, for example, I had one series that was Chicago and Vegas. Black pants for both teams. And because of the notion of shot blocking and jamming the front of the net, when a shot came through from the point and it ricocheted in, it could have gone off any of 5 sets of black pants. What color is the puck? Oh, it's black. So you have a lot of difficulty on a 32-inch screen, even though you're only about 2 feet away from it, in picking off on live action who it went off of. But Eddie, having a different angle, sometimes would be able to tell the truck while the crowd was not reacting because there was no crowd. But in that bit of silence that occurred after a goal was scored, he would be able to relate who had gotten it so that I could identify the goal scorer. So that was one way that he could help me during those rounds of the playoffs that year.
So I want to ask, had the NHL not resumed play that season and said, you know what, we're just going to cancel it here, we'll call the season, go to next year, do you think you still would have retired from broadcasting, or do you think you would have gone for one more season?
I don't know. I worked for a number of years with the Devils for Madison Square Garden Network, and even though he was not my boss, he was an influence, and Lou Lamoriello, and he used to always say, never answer hypothetical questions. So I'm not dodging you. I have no idea whether I would have gone one more year or not. I just don't know. Those decisions that I made were year to year for probably the last 7 or 8 years of my career. I was never on multi-year contracts. It was just every summer I would get in touch with NBC and we would decide whether I was going to go on for another year or not. It was all dependent on how I felt. So I would imagine there would have been a conversation during that summer about that. And I have no idea. Never thought about it.
Well, Doc, we want to thank you so much for coming on. We know you're a very busy man, but before we let you go, we have one final question. As I said earlier, you made so many calls over the years that we can go on and on for days about them, but it's very hard to pick. Is there one in specific that is your favorite?
No call specifically. There was one time that I sort of got lucky in that something came to my mind that I was happy about in retrospect. And it was a game where any announcer would have enhanced the game because the game was so good. It was the game between the Russian Olympic team and Team USA in Sochi in 2014, and it wound up going into a shootout after an overtime.
Mhm.
And because the Olympic rules are different than the NHL ones, after the third shootout round, you can have the same shooter go again. And because TJ Oshie still is so good at shootouts, Dan Bilesma, the coach, the shootout went 8 rounds, and he had TJ take 6 of the 8 shots. And he scored on 4 of them, and he wound up clinching it. But of course, Jonathan Quick at the other end was doing a pretty good job for Team USA too.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the teams shake hands after it's all done, and Team USA has won. And they are counting me to commercial. And something just crossed my mind. It wasn't planned. It just crossed my mind as we were going to commercial. And I had probably a couple of years earlier seen the movie Miracle, and that wonderful speech that several of the players from the 1980 Olympic team told me that Kurt Russell nailed, that Herb Brooks gave in the dressing room before the game with the Soviets. They said that it was just like Herb being there, which he was as an advisor to the film. Mm. And it crossed my mind to say, as they were counting to commercial, Pierre back with an interview in a moment. They paid their rubles to see the home team win. Mm. Not this game, not tonight. And then we went to commercial, and I was glad that I thought of it. And I felt that it fit the situation, but it was lucky that I thought about it, that I thought of it at that time with 7 seconds left in a countdown. So it wasn't a great call. It was just something that I was glad that I thought of, because it reminded me, and it may have reminded some of the viewers, about a great time in another game played between a U.S. Olympic team and one from Russia.
That's pretty incredible. I think it's just like such a slight detail that not even like a common viewer might even be able to pick up on, and to be able to throw that in, that's pretty magnificent.
A lot of times all it takes is gray hair and being bald. You get enough a lot of averages is on your side. But I think,
Doc,
and I sure wish you great years ahead and a lot of enjoyment. If you have what I've had, you'll have a great time.
Well, Doc, thank you so much. We really appreciate you.
Great time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doc.